It's a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
Just this week, the early baseball committee for the Hall of Fame announced Negro legends Bud Fowler and Buck O'Neil to finally be voted into Cooperstown. And also voted in were Gil Hodges, Jim Cott, Minnie Minoso, and Tony Oliva. We've talked on this podcast a number of times about adding players to the Hall of Fame. We just finished 2 episodes where we added 35, not 36 players, although we tried, to the Hall of Fame. And the players inducted were ones that we've talked about from time to time. We also are looking for metrics, and we were fortunate enough to run into a guy who had written a very interesting book called Baseball Generations, Career Value Index, and a new way to look at players in the Hall of Fame. And we found it fascinating enough that we invited David Gordon onto the program, to the podcast. And you're going to hear our conversation with him from just about a week ago.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. We are very lucky to have David Gordon here on the podcast today with us. We're going to be talking about his book that both myself and Mark read called Baseball Generations. And this was just for people who might not be familiar with it. This is sort of a book that takes a historical look going from, really the inception of baseball up until modern day, and looking at the different groupings of players and sort of looking for a different way to evaluate them on a career basis. And we kind of came across this when we were working on our own list of expanding the Hall of Fame. Something that we've talked a lot about on this podcast is we feel like there's not enough guys in the Hall of Fame. Right now, there's about a 1.1% of all the players that have played in Major League Baseball that are there, and we were shooting to move it up to about 1.25%, and that ended up being about 35, 36 players. Interestingly enough, we found this book, Baseball Generations, and we found this stat in there called CVI, Career Value Index, and just really the formation of this stat and everything that you made, David, was incredibly helpful for us for going into the remaining players that weren't in the Hall of Fame to try and identify who should be part of those 35 guys that should be added. And it was really interesting when we kind of made our lists prior to finding that, and we made our lists, we thought about the guys. And then when we actually came across CVI in your book and went through it, it was really interesting seeing how many of the picks that we made lined up with what you had been writing in your book. So we just wanted to first talk to you about, what was it like going through that process of coming up with CVI and writing Baseball Generations?
Yeah, well, the thing I started doing this just for my own personal interest and looking at lists of ranking players by wins above replacement, or WAR. And I noticed some things about WAR that just didn't make sense, in the sense that they didn't have face validity. Like the one I sort of fasten on in the book is comparing Sandy Koufax to Don Sutton. These are two, Sandy Koufax, obviously quit due to elbow arthritis about halfway through what would have been his career at age 30, and he only had about 6 really top years, but he was the best in the game for those 6 years, or the best or one of the best for those 6 years, and
he was the best.
And 5 years after he retired, the Hall of Fame, the bBWA elected him to the Hall of Fame with one of the largest votes up to that time, and everybody thought that he was among the greatest pitchers in baseball. And then you had, but if you look at his career WAR value, it's only around 49. He only has about 49 WAR over the course of his career because he didn't pitch very long. And then you have a person like Don Sutton, on the other hand, another ex-Dodger, who actually pitched for 23 years, and he had only about 3 of those 23 seasons where he had more than 5 wins above replacement, and he managed to accrue about 66 point something WAR. So, and he was elected to the Hall of Fame, but it wasn't right away. It was about the fifth try, I think. And it's a good pitcher. But most people, if you're talking about significant pitchers in baseball history, would say Sandy Koufax should be higher on your list than Don Sutton. And yet WAR ranks Don Sutton higher. And it occurred to me that when we think of Hall of Famers, we think it's not just accumulating what they did over the whole course of their career. It's saying how it really, what we think of a Hall of Famer as a guy who's what Bill James has black ink, leads the league in a lot of categories, is really thought of as the best or one of the best in the game for some significant period of time. Obviously, if you have a Willie Mays or a Babe Ruth who was the best in the game for 10 or more years, that's great. But sometimes you're choosing between guys who were the best in the game for something like 5 or 6 or 7 years and may not have had as long a career, and other guys who pitched 20 plus years who were never the best in the game. And I mean, I don't think, I'm not saying anything against Don Sutton, but he was never thought of as the best pitcher in the game.
Well, I think it actually, your point is so proven, because we were talking about this right before we came on, because we were talking about how your CVI helped kind of prove our argument of there are two guys that have won two of the guys that have won multiple MVPs with the Hall of Fame, with Roger Maris and Dale Murphy. When you look at the peaks, we think Dale Murphy should be in the Hall of Fame, but Maris probably shouldn't, because when you look at the 5-year period that Murphy put together, he has 5 years in a row, I think, of 5+ WAR. Well, Maris really only had those 2 unbelievable seasons, but then outside of that, he was kind of just more or less a good player, but not a Hall of Famer. So it's like, what's more meaningful, having that one sharp peak of excellence, or really sustaining it over a period of time?
Yeah, and I have one of the unfortunate things about Roger Maris is that it was actually his great personal misfortune that he broke Babe Ruth's 60 home run record, because it's made his hair fall. He didn't have that personality. He wasn't a star personality. And in a way, we're doing this to him after his death by continually nominating him to the Hall of Fame. And he's forever known as the guy who's no Babe Ruth and he's no Mickey Mantle. And in fact, he was a fine player. I liked him a lot when he played. He's not a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. And you mentioned Don Sutton. And so one of the things I thought about Don Sutton was, and you're right, I don't know that he was ever the best pitcher on his own team. And it's hard for me to think about a Hall of Famer, and he is one, who was never the number one. Andy Pettitte, I kind of look at the same way, going, well, I don't even know if he was ever the number one pitcher for the Yankees or the Astros or any team he was on.
That's true. I mean, Andy Pettitte, I think he only once came close to a Cy Young award. And he didn't. I don't think he pitched in that many All-Star games. I have that information.
No, he didn't. It was his postseason stuff that kind of.
Yeah, and even his postseason he wasn't tremendous in the postseason. I mean, he had he pitched a lot of the postseason. What he did is he pitched every year in the postseason, and he won. He won. 19? I'm not remembering them.
Yeah, I think he had 19.
Really that good at remembering numbers.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I did want to. We've been talking about it a little bit with the CVI, but for maybe some of our listeners who aren't familiar with your book, or maybe aren't as technically baseball-minded stats, can you just kind of give a brief little summary of what CVI, or Career Value Index, is?
Yeah, it's WAR based. So you start with Baseball Reference WAR, and for any season where a player accumulates more than 5 WAR, you get. You add 2 times you give him a bonus of 2 times the amount by which he exceeded 5 WAR. That's the basic thing. So if you have, say, Sandy Koufax having 9 WAR and or 10 WAR, let's say Sandy Koufax had 10 WAR in one season, you'd give him an extra 10 points in CVI because he's 5 WAR over the 5 threshold. So you give him 2 more. Double 5 WAR, so an extra 10 points. then to get it on the right scale back to WAR, there's a scale factor 0.8. So Koufax, it emphasizes players who exceed 5 WAR by a lot of in a lot of different seasons. So it emphasizes players who had really good years. A guy like Babe Ruth, who had something like 12 10 WAR seasons, he's off the charts in CVI. And his career WAR is 180 or so, but his CVI is about 270. So you just get lots of points for having WAR above 5, and every year you have WAR above 5, and then you have a guy like George Kell, who's in the Hall of Fame, who never had a WAR above 5, and so his CVI winds up being 0.8 times his career WAR. So you don't get that's the two extremes of people. The people who really benefit are the guys who had lots of good years, and the guys who really are hurt are the guys who are just steady but unspectacular.
David, one of the
other thing I should mention that's in there is I've oversimplified by saying the number is 5. I mean, it actually varies depending on what year you're talking about, whether it's pitcher or a hitter, because there are big disparities in opportunities, especially for pitchers. You have all the way from a guy like Old Hoss Radburn, who and he pitched. He faced 5,200 batters in 2 years in 1883 and 84. He has WAR values of close to 20 in those 2 seasons, and then you have somebody like Clayton Kershaw, who pitches about a third of that, a third as many batters faced or innings pitched. And then you go at the other extreme to the modern closer like Mariano Rivera. But Mariano Rivera gets 1/10 the number of innings that Old Hoss Radburn got. So
right.
You can't just compare those WAR values straight up.
You don't include playoff statistics in your CVI. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, I'd love to, but WAR doesn't include them, so I can't include them.
Right, you'd have to interpolate between the playoff statistics and in Baseball Reference and sort of plug that in. And I looked at it, I'm like, I don't even know how you would do something like that.
Our feelings with playoffs stats is like they can really only help you. It's something that you can look at, like if you're comparing two guys that are very similar, and one of them also had a history of excellence in the playoffs, that could be the difference. But you really are looking to be like, oh, that guy was bad in the playoffs, so you should not, A-Rod stunk in the playoffs other than that 1 year in 2009, that should be a knock against him. No, he just wasn't great in the playoffs. Everything else in his career speaks for it.
Barry Bonds wasn't particularly good in the playoffs either, except for 1 year. And Ted Williams only got into the World Series once, and he stunk during that World Series. So
so you can't. Yeah, Barry Bonds is like, even with the steroid ding, it's like it's still wild how much CVI he puts up, even with your digging of the steroid guys, which I thought was a brilliant thing you did.
Thank you. I didn't even go into that, but there are some bells and whistles attached to it. I wanted to keep it relatively simple and stay on the main point.
But I think
those are the 2 main points.
It's really relevant to mention, though, right, that you did have a mechanism to sort of evaluate, because for so long, like Gordon and I put in the steroid guys that we thought should be in there because they need to be in the Hall of Fame along with Pete Rose. That's our opinion. And you've given it sort of at least a way for people to go, yeah, well, he's a steroid user and we should ding him. Okay, well, now you're dinging him. You came up with your 20% or for pitchers, 10%, depending on the time they did it. And maybe it's perfect, maybe it's not perfect. Who knows? The point is, at least it's some way of evaluating it that we don't have right now.
Yeah, I think that's right. And my argument for the validity of this is that if you actually look at Barry Bonds' career, and you have a pretty clear idea of when he started using steroids, and if you take those years when he used steroids and you plot, they stand out, not as much as you'd think. I mean, it's not like home runs stand out, of course, but WAR, home runs are only a small part of WAR, so it's not, it doesn't make Barry Bonds twice as good as he was before, but it makes him about 25% better than he was in his other years. So I figured, and most people aren't as diligent and obsessed as Barry Bonds was. So I mean, I think that you can't just be like Pud Galvin and drink an elixir and think that you're going to go out and be there. I don't ding him for using steroids, because a big part of using steroids is exercise, is training.
Yeah.
Steroids alone won't do anything for you.
And Bonds won 3 MVPs with the Pirates, if I'm not mistaken, long before any of that happened. So Gordon and I would joke and say, I think let's put all the guys who've won 3 MVPs into the Hall of Fame. I think I'd be in pretty solid ground if we did that.
Yeah. I can't think of anybody like that who really shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame.
I think the thing with Bonds, you could basically say we could probably put Bonds in the Hall of Fame twice. You could put him in once as a Pirate for his career there, and then just once as a Giant. Both of those guys were Hall of Famers, even though it looked like the Barry Bonds in San Francisco ate the Barry Bonds from Pittsburgh with how much bigger he got.
Well, even in his early years in San Francisco, I don't think he used steroids.
He was unbelievable.
But if he quit after the 1998 season and never played another game, he'd still be one of the top 20 players.
Exactly.
Right. So in the book, you've done a nice job of breaking down the eras, and Gordon and I are always concerned about trying to talk about old baseball players through the, as you call, the founding generation from 1871 to 1900, and then followed by the dead ball generation from 1900 to 1919. We have a hard time evaluating that just as much as everybody else does, because the reporting isn't as good, and you don't really always have. So we've kind of shied away from it. You've done a really good job in this book of at least allowing us to look at this numerically in a way that we can begin to sort of try to contextualize those players from 1890 to somebody who played in 1990.
Right. It'll never be perfect because, for example, part of WAR is defense, and we don't really know. First of all, a lot of them didn't even play with gloves for a good part of that era.
Right.
And there, I think in the 1870s, in the early 1870s, there were something like 10 runs per team per game.
Saw that, right? 2/3
of the runs were unearned. I never knew that before. You have to. There were one time 9 balls. It was 9 balls to walk. Pitchers had to throw underhand at the beginning of Major League Baseball. So there's a lot of stuff that's. At one time, I thought of just not putting that in the book because
I understand why.
It's too different. But that's one of the most fascinating eras in baseball. So
it's an origin story. It's really what we're talking about. And I thought, you made a note in your classical generation from 1920 to 1946 that there was an increase in hard hit balls, right? I think you noted that. And so my thought was, how did we measure that in 1920 to 1946 in terms of what was a hard hit ball versus who was tracking that kind of stuff?
Oh, well, nobody was measuring hard hit balls. There were just more people swinging hard and hitting home runs and, I think I read about Cap Anson. I'm not old enough to remember, but I read about him that he was this big, strong guy, and he choked up on the bat. He didn't even try to swing hard. He basically guided the ball, and it's a pretty good strategy in those days because a lot of the fielders weren't wearing gloves, and there were multiple errors per game. So you put the ball on the ground, you have a 40% chance of getting on base. So
I think he played during the time where there was a short period of time, 5 or 6 years, where you could have a flat bat on one side. It didn't have to be
That's right.
around the whole time. And it's just the notion of that. We're going to do a future podcast on the history of the baseball bat. We have somebody who wrote a book on it, and it's just kind of fascinating. But the idea of a flat bat, just to see somebody play with one, and I think Cap Anson was right around the time that happened too.
Yeah, well, he played for 27 years, so I think the flat bat era occurred within his career. I don't remember how many years. It was only like 2 or 3 years, I think, that they allowed that. But
So
It was while he was playing.
we want to ask you about Tom McCarthy. because so Gordon and I we're not reductive in the Hall of Fame, and this is maybe where we differ a little bit, right? Because I think we could keep our number to 1.11% if we simply remove the guys who are clearly like, what the heck were they thinking? Kinds of selections like Tom McCarthy, but we're going to
Wayner brother.
Right. We say, you know what? We're going to not be reductive, and we're just going to have a slightly bigger one because I'm not going to go back and try to remove guys who probably don't belong there. And without putting any shade on Bill Mazeroski, he would be in that group of people too that makes us scratch our head. If it weren't for one home run in one World Series game, he probably wouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, actually.
Yeah. So in fairness, he was, he's the highest ranked second baseman of all time in terms of defense, but he belongs in the category of Rabbit Moranville and a lot of guys like that who were elected as middle infielders who were elected almost exclusively on defense, even though they were not.
But Tom McCarthy is like way down there.
Yeah, he wasn't even a good fielder, as far as I could tell. I mean, I think he was credited with inventing the hit and run play.
I've heard the same thing.
Manager, but I tried to say, well, maybe he was a good manager, but he had a losing record as a manager too. So I don't understand how he got in.
And I think, we've also had a discussion on, we elect players as managers. We elect them as players or as managers and executives. And there are guys, quite a few of them, who cross over, who, if you added the sum total of their individual contributions, might be Hall of Famers, just not as one or the other. What do you think about that?
I think that works for me. I mean, I think that if somebody was a really successful manager, and they're sort of borderline as a player, I could see putting them in. I mean, there's one guy that I like. Again, I don't want to always talk about the 19th century, but there's a guy, John Montgomery Ward, who was a pitcher. He blew out his arm. Then he was a shortstop. He was a good but not great player. He was a manager and managed for a couple of years. He also went to law school. He organized the first play while he was playing. He went to law school. He organized the first player union. He was a representative of several people who were jumping to the American League and back during the early days when the two leagues were in competition. And it's just a big influence on baseball. And I think that you take the fact that the guy was sort of fringe Hall of Famer as a player, and that he had a outsized influence on the game in those days, and I think you've got a Hall of Famer. I mean, that to me, in my mind, but I don't know. I mean, one of the problems with it is I don't know how to say, what's the metric for saying who was really a good manager versus who was just stuck around a long time. I mean, Connie Mack managed the A's for 53 years.
53 years or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Was he a good manager? I don't know. He had a lot of bad years. He had a losing record altogether, but
it's really hard to evaluate them. Yeah, it's just so hard to evaluate managers. Like because it's so much of what they do isn't seen by the fans. You're just, if the team wins, they're a good manager. It's very results based. I feel like it's so hard to really quantify what they bring. And obviously we're trying to do it more and more with players and stats, but managers is a lot trickier.
Yeah. And I think Joe Torre is another example of a guy who was a borderline Hall of Fame player, but was so successful as a manager. And I don't have a quantitative metric for measuring a manager, but I think that anybody who could manage that Yankee team with Steinbrenner at one end and a lot of stars at the other end, I mean, this guy he had to be doing a good job.
He had a few players too, though.
Yeah, he did
on those teams, and Dusty Baker. Right now, we talked about him, who had a solid major league career, far from Hall of Fame, but a good major league. And he's going to be a guy who's going to win 2,000 games as a manager. And aside from Bruce Bochy, who is likely to go in as a manager, everybody who's won 2,000 games as a manager is in the Hall of Fame. So I think Dusty has a pretty good chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. But,
Yeah. So, and we like that. And Gil Hodge is another guy who always comes up in all our discussions, and we have some very passionate fans who think he's been wronged. And he played at a time before there were gold gloves, which is one of the measuring sticks you might use. He didn't get any credit for having won those.
Yeah.
And it's hard when you look at his statistics because they're right on the edge, and you have to find a way to put him in because of his contribution to a series of very good Dodger teams has to play into it. So there's a lot of nuance, I think, when you talk about a player like Gil Hodges.
Yeah. I mean, Hodges. Yeah, I don't view him as a Hall of Famer as a player. Although I will mention that that one of the WAR is not perfect. It's not a perfect metric either.
And it's hell too.
One of the things that's not very good about it is the defensive WAR, and in particular, I think it's the first base. WAR for first baseman. Defensive WAR for first baseman makes no sense. There are people who are thought of as, you have Keith Hernandez, who's thought of as a tremendous first baseman, and his career defensive WAR at first base is 1.5, which isn't very much.
No,
which we all know is not correct.
Yeah, and Gil Hodges had a WAR, above. He had better than zero defensive WAR as a first baseman. Very few first basemen even rank above zero in defensive WAR because the WAR views them as being sort of the fact that they only play first base is automatically makes them a below average defender. And if you're like Keith Hernandez and you're really great, you can basically get above zero.
Right. And we do use so we've tried our shorthand of your CVI just to sort of get a different way of looking at it so that the average fan can go, okay, did he have 5 seasons of 5+ WAR? Because it's interesting how many guys have 4 and that they fall short and they just didn't make it to the 5th season, and they correlate a lot to your CVI. Absolutely.
And there's even shades of gray within that, because there'll be guys that have 4 seasons of 5+ WAR, and then the 5th season they have is like 4.9, 4.8. But then there's other guys that'll have like 2 or 3 seasons of like 8 WAR, but then they don't even get above 3 for the rest of their career. So it's really interesting looking at like that dichotomy.
Yeah, but it's not the number of and CVI. It's not the number of seasons that matters.
Right.
It's. I mean, if you're way above, if you're way above 5, being at 5.1 only gets you a very tiny bonus. Being at 8 or 9 gets you a big bonus. So the guy who has a few years when they're very, very good does better than a guy who's just a little bit above 5 for 5 or 6 years.
And
so
we talked about, when we dinged Manny Ramirez, and this was one of our favorite players to talk about and all that, and one of the greatest right-handed hitters to ever hit. And yes, a disinterested fielder would be, the nice way of putting it. And his association with PEDs, along with his disinterest in defense, really hurts him. And I'm still working on trying to find a way to get this guy in with his 312 career average and his 29 postseason home runs, sort of waiting on the other side of, you got to think about that.
Yeah. I think Manny is a great hitter, and if I didn't ding him for steroids, he would have been
he gets in clean
Hall of Fame territory. He's only slightly below it. But if the steroid, I don't know what to make of. He was such a unique character.
Yes.
That I think what really kept him from being, in the elite players was his defense. And it wasn't just that he didn't have range or didn't catch fly balls. He would just do stupid things out in the outfield.
I mean, like the water,
the anti-Derek Jeter,
like the water bottle in his back pocket as he's out in left field. I mean, it's hard to take a guy, seriously, about his defense when he's out there drinking water during the game in left field.
Yeah, I know, and the steroids gives writers an easy out on him because they're right. I think that if they're not going to vote for Barry Bonds, they're certainly not going to vote for Manny Ramirez.
And I want to talk about other players that are right there. So we really like Jim Edmonds. I think you do too.
Yes.
He is just on the cusp, right at 61. I think you have 62 as your number.
Yes.
Ortiz is slightly over. Santana's 62.6, and that's
surprised me because
Yeah.
I thought he'd be a guy that would end up in just outside, and the fact that he's up there at that 62 mark's impressive to me.
Yeah, he was awfully good for that short period of time. He would be like a CVI poster boy.
Right.
Because his career WAR. I mean, I don't think he'll ever get into the Hall of Fame because at least as long as people still pay attention to wins and that sort of thing. But
that's a stat we could.
But he was like the best pitcher in baseball for about 4 years.
Yeah, and I always remember that he would have those second halves of seasons where he would come out in the second half of the season and just be unhittable the entire time. He'd post like absolutely bonkers stat lines the back half of the year.
Yeah.
But then you've got Kevin Appier. And this really surprised me, right? At 63.7. I'm thinking, Kevin Appier? Really?
Yeah.
But you look at his career stats, they're better than you'd think.
That's right. He's better than you think. I would never. I mean, he totally surprised me. I mean, there's some other guys that are up there. Rick Russell surprised me.
Right. Everybody talks about him, right?
Wilbur Wood surprised me how well he comes out.
Yeah.
But if you look at him, I mean, it doesn't come from nowhere. There are the numbers. I guess I'm much as I'd like numbers. I don't consider. I mean, I think that numbers don't tell the whole story. I mean, I still have some.
Yes, you're a fan. We're all fans.
There's some area for human judgment.
Yes, exactly.
We never want to just say, well, if a guy has a CVI above X, then he's in. If he doesn't, he's out.
No. We feel this guy, and that makes it fun to talk. We just want to be arguing about guys like Appier and not about Barry Bonds and Pete Rose. We'd rather argue with those guys. And of today's players, I'm going to mention the guys that I think we talked about, Gordon and I, about us. Oh, these are Hall of Famers: Miguel Cabrera, Pujols, Molina, and he might be the most controversial. Mike Trout, Verlander, Scherzer, Kershaw, Greinke, and Joey Votto.
Yes.
Any of those names on there strike you off the top of your head without looking at numbers as, I don't know about that?
Yeah, no, I think I have all of those guys are. I mean, if any of those guys retired today, they would CVI would put all those guys in the Hall of, except for Molina, and catchers are different, a little bit of a different story. But
I mean, isn't it the old baseball saying, catchers are a different breed?
They're different. They're a different story. I mean, I try to correct for catchers because the problem with catchers, they don't usually play as much. There's a lot of wear and tear, and I think that I'm not sure that Baseball Reference WAR or any WAR that I've seen gives them enough credit for defense, calling a game, that sort of thing. I mean, I think anybody knows who watches baseball and you talk to managers and so on, they'll tell you, Yadier Molina is a key element of the Cardinals' success in all these years. It doesn't show up in CVI.
Right.
Yeah, you can't quantify Yadier Molina calling a really good game, but there's a reason why, after hundreds of different pitchers that have come through that organization while he's been playing there, the Cardinals have always had a pretty good pitching staff. It's not he's a part of that.
Right.
Yeah. So I just don't see, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and argue that Yadier Molina is only in the upper 40s in CVI and therefore he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. That would be. Yeah. I think that there's certainly a lot of guys that are in the Hall of Fame that are less deserving than him. The other one, I was disappointed that the Buster Posey saw fit to retire this year because CVI has him just on the fringe. The book doesn't go through 2021, but with his 2021 season, he would have been close to 60 in CVI, in the upper 50s. And you'd think that if he just played another year or two, he would be unambiguous. But there's another guy that I like. You may remember in the book, Thurman Munson.
Oh yeah,
that I think ought to be in the Hall of Fame. And if it's uncanny if you compare Thurman Munson to Buster Posey, it's uncanny how similar their careers are.
Right.
It's They were both rookies of the year. They both played 12 years. They were rookies of the year. They each were in 3 World Series. But Buster Posey's team won all 3. Munson's team won 2 out of the 3. But Munson was actually better in the postseason. They each made 7 All-Star appearances. They were like team leaders for whatever that means. So those guys, and they both have roughly the same CVI, right. Bunsen just above 60, but Posey just below 60. So I think it actually, given the amount of that New York is such a media hub, it really surprises me that Thurman Munson was never elected.
So
maybe he will sometime.
You also put Joe Mauer, and we would agree with you on that. And even though Joe Mauer caught only slightly more than half of all the games he ever played in the major leagues, and I guess if you're going to ding him for something, you'd say, well, that's that's not that. But I was surprised that he actually had more than half his games at catcher, but he did, and certainly a very deserving guy, we think.
Yeah.
So, well, the book is Baseball Generations, Career Value Index, a new look at the Hall of Fame by author David Gordon. It's his first book, right, David?
Yes.
Any other books?
Well, I do have another one that I wrote actually about my career, about my actual. I spent 40 years at the National Institutes of Health, and I actually wrote a book called The American Cardiovascular Pandemic: 100-Year History. It's actually, although it's a very different subject, it has some similarities to the baseball book in that it's a mixture of history and statistics, and tries to tell a story that hopefully you don't have to be a physician to understand. But that one also, they both came out at the same time, even though I wrote Baseball Generations before I wrote the American Cardiovascular Pandemic.
Well, both Gordon and I found it to be a very enjoyable read, Baseball Generation, so I'm sure your other book is going to show you have a nice writing style. We really like the concept. It's so well researched, and you can get it on Amazon at a reasonable amount of money, as did we all. So we want to thank you for joining Gordon and me. We are going to be using CVI probably as long as we do our podcast and beyond. So again, thank you very much for joining us, David.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Coop.